Welcome to 10 for 10, a series of interviews with personalities and dedicated leaders across the Major Arena Soccer League. I'm your host, Erik Bergrud. For this week's episode, I'm joined by Tacoma Stars General Manager, Coach, and Forward, Nick Perera. Welcome to 10 for 10, Nick.
Thanks for having me, Erik. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Let's get started. So congratulations on your selection as a team captain for the 2025 MASL All-Star Game. What approach did Coach Stefan Stokic and you take in drafting your team?
Yeah, thank you very much. First off, we kind of had a discussion where we wanted to make sure that the teams didn't feel like it was just Tacoma plus KC versus everybody else. So we tried to diversify our picks a little bit. It ended up being that we ended up picking a few of the KC players towards the back end, but we wanted to try to really give it a league-wide feel, so it felt like it was a really sort of everybody against everybody kind of a feel.
So you mentioned on the draft selection show that you were trying to avoid getting kicked. So you think you did a good job?
I don't know. I feel like I get kicked no matter what. I'm just so slow out there that I'm an easy target. So I'll probably get kicked. Yeah, I mean, Stefan, who's a Stars player, ended up on the other team. He was kind of an early pick. So he sent me a text right away saying, I can't wait to kick you. So that'll be fun. Yeah.
For sure. So this won't be your first MASL All-Star Game appearance. You were a winning player coach at the 2020 game in Kansas City. Is the goal in these games just to have fun, or do you and the other players have something to prove?
I think, well, first off, it is to have fun. Absolutely is. I think it's to showcase the league. But I think this one's a bit different because it's a midweek game during week games where we have games. So I think that the approach this year, I'm hopeful will be a lot more hands-off, a lot more have fun, a lot more kind of the vibe you get of an NBA All-Star game where it's a little bit more showcasing some stuff and less about hard D. But the one in KC that we played was a preseason match with the COVID year coming. It was supposed to build hype. So that one got very competitive, very physical, very quickly. So I'm hoping there's a different feel, and I think that this mid-season sort of MASL All-Star Game is calling for players to really put their foot on the brake a little bit, and I think it'll be more fun, more show, less sort of rugged, hard-nosed defending.
Throughout this season, we're exploring topics related to the business of indoor soccer. In addition to your roles on the field, you serve as the Stars GM. What are your responsibilities in that capacity?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the MASL is a pretty unique sort of animal in that it calls for a lot of different roles for each person to have, right? So anybody who says you're a head coach in the MLS, you are a coach. In the MASL, you're a head coach. It's everything that kind of falls within the spectrum. And I think that's the same for the GM. So it's everything from travel, hotel accommodations, anything from hosting the visiting team, preparing to go on travel, player negotiations, salary, contractual things, league meetings, board calls. So it's a bit of everything, to be honest with you. And it's fun in that it keeps me on my toes. So there's no dull moments, but it is difficult at times to sort of re-hone into the competitive side when you're dealing with things that are kind of outside of the scope.
Teams across the MASL have taken different approaches to talent development. Could you explain the philosophy of fielding the Tacoma Stars reserves? How important is that local player pipeline in developing the Stars roster?
Yeah, I mean, it's so important. It's such a huge part of our roster now. And I think when I first sort of took over years ago, it was underused and maybe even borderline conflictive. Like we didn't really mesh very well. And I think that over the years, we've seen some incredible players come through. I mean, just in our team this year, now you're seeing sort of the explosion of, Logan Jones and Adrian Correa, who started out 5 and 6 years ago. And you've got Tyler John who's come through, and Cale Spence and Kai Briscoe who've come through now. And we have, and Luis Birueta, who's our backup goalkeeper. So many players that have come through the program that have gotten their footsteps in there. And I think it's massive because what we talk about always on my podcast too is how long does it take an indoor player to adapt to the game? Well, it takes games. It's not years, it's games. So for us, the ability for them to get 15, 20 games in a season where maybe the stakes are a little bit lower, but they're still learning those vital lessons is so important. And of course, having part of our staff, Adam Becker, be serving on both staffs really makes it so that we can transition a player from what he's seeing in the whistle to what he's seeing in the MASL.
At the All-Star game in Utica on February 12th, you'll be competing against a team captained by UCFC forward and potential league MVP Kelvin Oliveira. As an MASL MVP yourself, how important is it to identify talent from outside the United States?
Man, I mean, yeah, Kelvin this year has been putting on a real show. I mean, he's gotten some incredible highlight moments already, and we're, 10, 12 games in. So he's obviously a special talent, and then watching him go to the Kings League and kind of destroy the competition as he did there was really cool too. But I think the difficulty is, as everybody knows in the league, is the visa process and how to find that. And so I think we've had to get very creative as how we find talent from outside. It's got to be a very specific player who's got characteristics to play, but also that happens to tick the boxes, in the immigration side. But if you think of the players that have been league MVPs over the last 10 years, they're all players who played indoor prior to the MASL. Frank Tayu was in the PASL, Ian Bennett, MISL. I think Leo was an MVP one year, right? MISL career. Myself, and then I'm trying to think who else has won it in that time. I think that's it, right? Frank's won 3 or 4. Ian won 2. I won 2. Leo won 1 or 2. I don't think anybody else has won it. So it's all players that have been in the game for a long, long time. Genaro Castillo from last year from Empire, who has big time outdoor experience as well. So I think it's very difficult to find players that are not in the indoor game and have them transition into that level and immediately sort of kick in and take it over. The closest we saw was probably last year with Marco Fabian coming in from a big outdoor career and having that level of an impact. So it is difficult. It's a really interesting place to look for players, but I also think it's indoor players are the ones that are going to be the ones, right? So it's a league where getting old is not a massive negative. Like in the MLS at 32, 33, if you're not one of the best players, you're kind of starting to fade. The better players in our league are the ones who've been around for longer. So I think that longevity is a huge part of it. And I think that retaining those players is really the hard part of recruiting. Like keeping a player for a long time is really tough.
Several MASL players, yourself included, have represented the U.S. on its national beach soccer and futsal teams. What is the benefit to the league when its players participate in international competitions without dasher boards?
Exposure. I mean, one of the biggest challenges that MASL has always had, in my opinion, is exposure, right? Is how do we get our product in front of people? How do we get our product to be digestible and passed around internationally, nationally even? And I think the ability to have U.S. soccer representing or players representing U.S. soccer at that level, being in that spotlight in front of different eyes, different audiences, different people, I think really kind of changes the way that some players are viewed. I think from the outside, when people watch the MASL, sometimes there's a perception that the players are not as good as they are. I say it all the time, is like people seem to think that the MASL is kind of like a slow moving league. But it only takes a player to play one game to realize that is not it. So seeing players compete, obviously we saw Zach Reggett and Morales and Mendez competing and Ortiz competing on the futsal team a couple years ago and doing so well. And obviously myself, Chris Toth, Ricardo Carvalho, Alessandro Canale playing for beach soccer for the national team for years and years. I think it lends credibility to the league, but it's a level of exposure that maybe we don't always get.
So you mentioned the Stars Align podcast, just another role in addition to everything else you do. What was the inspiration for that series and how much time do you invest in it?
Well, how much time do I invest in it? Not enough, because I think it's very popular in terms of our fan base. They watch it a lot. And obviously it's really cool to see people like yourself and others around the league kind of tuning in and commenting. It started during COVID. When honestly, my big concern when COVID hit from an MASL standpoint was we won't be able to recover. Is that we won't be able to recover and people are going to focus in on things that are far more important than the MASL and we won't be able to get back into it. And so my thought was, one, let's give the people that are at home that have nothing going on right now, which is basically all of us, right? Something to talk about, something to banter about. It started as the Tacoma Stars happy hour. And it was basically sitting at home with a beer and just shooting the breeze. And over time, it's kind of morphed into a show, which has kind of got a cool personality to it. And I get hit up all the time for people that want to come on the show, and we kind of have to now decide who we want on the show, as opposed to what it used to be where I would beg people to come on. But the hard part is the games. You know, we want to do them Friday evenings, Saturday evenings, but now with all the back-to-backs and the congestion of the schedule, it's so hard to schedule. So we've been gone dormant for a couple of weeks, but I think we've had a couple of there was a couple of shows that had 3,000 and 4,000 people tuning in and watching. So that was really cool. Yeah. And Pete's always trying to get me to do more. So it's just trying to schedule them that's hard, because you're traveling across the country and you just land and you don't know if you're going to be able to tune in time. So it started out as a way for us all to kind of reconnect over indoor soccer, and it's turned into just a discussion.
Well, thank you, Nick, for joining us today. We'll be back next week with another episode of 10 for 10.